What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. It has been a hot minute since I've done a video for my series where I review your websites. I believe now this is the fourth video I'm making in this series, so I'm gonna mix up the structure a little bit today. In the prior videos in this series, I was evaluating your websites based on 4 variables: the 5-second rule, trust building, can you help me with my specific issue, and is it relatively easy to figure out what the next steps are. I spoke about all those variables at length in the prior videos, so I'll link to those prior videos in the series below. Today, I thought it might be interesting to just look at one variable that I would argue is the most important variable out of all of these variables. And that is, drumroll please, trust building. Because honestly, I've seen a lot of really beautiful looking websites out there that are really easy to use. It's easy to tell what somebody is about, but I still am just not so sure I can trust the person. And that doesn't mean that you're not trustworthy. It just means that your website isn't necessarily conveying how trustworthy you are. So all the variables that I go over are important, but honestly, if you can nail the trust building one, I mean, that's the most important thing, because that's kind of what our whole job is, right? To be trustworthy and help people through their most vulnerable things. But it's not necessarily so apparent how to go about building that trust if we're not actually yet sitting in the room together or sitting in our virtual therapy session together. We gotta kind of communicate that before they've ever talked to us. So how do we do that? And let me clarify, I'm not trying to set this high bar of like you need to build so much trust just from your website that somebody's willing to kind of like entrust you with their entire life. That's not how relationships work. You know, we build trust in little bitty steps at a time. So I'm just looking for how to build enough trust that somebody says, yeah, I'm ready to reach out and learn more. And since websites are pretty one way in the sense of like, we're just putting text and pictures and things on our website for somebody to observe, and we don't get to do that nice back and forth interaction that we do in session, it can feel pretty tricky to build trust. I think a lot of folks try to deal with this by describing their trustworthiness by saying things like, I'm very trustworthy, I'm very humble, I'm very self-aware, or things like I value self-reflection and learning and growing, etc., which is nice, but sometimes when somebody says, I am something, it could instill distrust. So let's go over some of the signs that, at least for me, signal like little cues that somebody just might be trustworthy. To me, one of the biggest heavy hitters is humility. Any way to acknowledge that we're not perfect, we're capable of making mistakes, we're always looking to observe ourselves to see where we might be making those mistakes, since we understand we are capable of making those mistakes. And honestly, I think the other cues I'm about to list here really stem from humility, but let's go ahead and list those. Self-reflection is a big one because that's something that is easy for us to name out loud. It could sound something like, you know, as I reflect back on my earlier years when I was going through this hard thing, I realized that I didn't have these tools that, if I had, would have helped me so much. Once I found them, it was really helpful. I think another cue of trustworthiness is flexibility, because again, if we embrace humility as a value, then we understand we might make mistakes. If we understand we might make mistakes, then we realize we might need to pivot. For example, you know, I view therapy as a collaborative process. So though I may have a sense of what direction we're headed, I always invite your feedback, and I'm flexible to change paths if whatever we're working on isn't quite working for you. And I already hinted at the next cue, which is openness to feedback. Because if we're being flexible, we need our clients to give us feedback in order to know when we need to flex and pivot. So all of that said, I thought I would just take a quick peek at a couple of your websites that I haven't looked at yet from this series and see if I can find any of these trust building cues or offer some gentle feedback for how you might kind of expand what you have to help build more trust with potential clients. And as always, thank you so much to all of you who've contributed your websites. It is an incredibly vulnerable thing to say, sure, you can publicly comment on my work online, and I will do my best to be respectful and gentle in how I give the feedback as well. All right, so let's dive in to our first website of the day. I'm just gonna say Dr. Williams for now because I know I'm gonna mispronounce your name. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'm just scrolling down to the About section on the homepage, and I already see a little signal that we just talked about where Dr. Williams says, we will collaborate to set an insightful course forward. I mean, this is just like a few sentence blurb on the homepage, and right in the first sentence, it says this. So Dr. Williams is already touching on a trust building approach. Let me go to the About page and read the full thing. Okay, so Dr. Williams' About page reiterates a lot of what we saw on the homepage About section, with a little bit of extras about their specialties, and also naming some of their values in their therapeutic approach. So the second paragraph here says, I take a warm and empathic position with my patients, ensuring well-being for their whole selves, and rely on building a genuinely meaningful therapeutic relationship, valuing authenticity, humor, and compassion. Through this collaborative approach, we will become curious about your experiences and find ways to build skills and self-understanding. So I'm seeing a lot of signals of what Dr. Williams values. And I'm looking for, I think, a little bit more, right? So probably what Dr. Williams could do to help build more trust with potential clients is, in addition to naming these values of being empathic, being authentic, being collaborative, is to share something that exemplifies that. You could share an example of what it looks like to interact with a client. You might say something along the lines of, I make sure we have regular check-ins to see if the approach we're using is still working for you, and we make adjustments accordingly, right? So there's ways to communicate the value with just like little tiny examples of what that actually looks like. Like if we had a video camera in your sessions, like how would we be able to observe you being collaborative? Please do not share the details of what you've done with specific clients, but these general concepts of here's what this might look like to sit with me and have that value be embodied in our session together. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for letting me give feedback on your website. It is beautiful, by the way. I think you're doing a fabulous job, and I say this in all videos in this series, but your website might be just already working magically for you and you don't need any feedback. I'm just kind of sharing where I could see things improve, because there's always room for improvement for all of us, my own website included, very much so. Okay, let's take a look at another website. At the top, this one says, Dr. Jenna Therapy, rediscover yourself and finally feel secure in who you are. Online LGBTQ plus therapy in Minneapolis and throughout Minnesota, right? MN is Minnesota, for queer, trans, and non-binary adults. Love that. So I'm going to scroll down and see if we can find a little about section. I appreciate so much. It's so subtle. Dr. Jenna is very clear that she focuses on LGBTQ plus care. And right in this little second paragraph in her about section on the homepage, she says, it's all too common for LGBTQ plus folks to doubt ourselves or face mental health struggles. So we just learned a lot just from her using the word ourselves instead of themselves. And I can only imagine that if I were on the website and I saw that word ourselves, like I would just feel an immediate sense of relief. Okay, so let's carry on to the full about page and see what else we find. She goes into sharing a little bit of self-disclosure about herself. And this is something I've talked about before, but I know can become a stuck point for so many therapists, is like, is it okay to self-disclose on our website or with our clients in general? The rule of thumb, of course, is self-disclosure is helpful if it's for our client's benefit. Now, sometimes we might think it's for our client's benefit when it's really for us, but some amount of self-disclosure can be quite helpful. And I think this is a great example here that Dr. Jenna shows on her website. She says, as a bi queer person, I've struggled at times to find a therapist specialized in LGBTQ plus mental health. It was common for me to find LGBTQ affirming therapists listed online. What I needed, though, was a therapist who was not just affirming, but also knowledgeable about LGBTQ plus identities and queer trans mental health. I'm so grateful for the LGBTQ plus specialized therapists I found along the way. They helped me improve my mental health while simultaneously talking about the subtleties of being a queer person in our society. I want all queer and trans people to have that experience. I mean, this is just a beautiful example of disclosing enough about her own experience to essentially show the shared identity that she has with the clients that she serves, and also how she understands how transformative it is to have a therapist who really gets it, and that she would love to be that therapist for you, just like she has gone through her own self-reflective, self-awareness experience in seeing her own therapist. Okay, lovely. This about page gets an A+. Good job, Dr. Jenna. I am going to see if I can look at one more website for this video. Okay, as we have, I'm just going to go ahead and look for just the trust building pieces here. As I scroll down, I don't see an about section. It's a pretty short and sweet homepage. So let's go ahead and click to the about tab. This is a really lovely bio. And Saloni, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Saloni starts by giving a bit of background about themselves and then goes on to share their approach with clients and then some kind of like fun facts about themselves. And the background is quite a beautiful story that Saloni immigrated from India to Vancouver in 2017. That's pretty recent. Yeah, they say here, this transition was a challenging time for me that brought valuable growth and insight, which I share in my work. Absolutely. And then they go on to share their background, their professional background. Before becoming a therapist, they were professional makeup artists. And then they say, after arriving in Canada, I began my journey towards wellness and healing that led to a career change and ultimately a transformation in my own relationship with self. I draw a great amount of inspiration from nature and my practice of yoga and meditation. After that, Saloni steps into talking about their approach with clients. I'm passionate about working with children, youth, and their families, and they carry on about, creating a warm environment and all of that, which is lovely. And Saloni, I think if you wanted to expand on building trust in your about page, I would create a little bit more of a bridge there between this section about your background and the section about your approach. Because I heard you acknowledge, like, here's this story. You clearly have gone through a lot of self-reflective work, been through challenges, and come out the other side. And that's also clearly informed your motivation for pursuing this career path. And then you go on to your approach and saying, you have this trauma-informed, collaborative, child-centered approach, etc. And it'd be really lovely to kind of hear almost a little bit more explicit, like connecting of the dots. Again, if we had a camera in your session, what does it look like to have a child-centered approach? For example, is it that you sit down and play together and you sit on the floor together? I mean, whatever it looks like for you. Give a little bit more detail of what that looks like. Well, I think I'm going to pause here as far as going through the websites. We'll save the rest, which there's still plenty more, for another video in this series, and maybe I'll focus on some other aspect of folks' websites. For those of you who had your websites featured in today's episode, check your email. I reached out to you to send you a little thank you, so keep your eyes open for that. If there is an element of your website that you're looking for more feedback on, let me know what those are in the comments below, so that then I might be able to take that lens and apply it to future videos in this series where I'm looking at your websites. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform for all users and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, I enjoyed this take on giving feedback on your therapist websites. Y'all are doing a great job. Listen, websites have come a long way since I started in 2012. Back in 2012, most therapists didn't even have a website, and the ones who did, they weren't good, and mine included. I'm just amazed to see just how incredible your websites are. So thank you again for sharing them, and I look forward to seeing you in another video in this series. Until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.